Chapter 7 Computer Fraud Protection. Certificate Examination in Prevention of Cybercrimes and Fraud Management. Subscribe, like, and share. Computer Fraud Protection. Security controls are safeguards or countermeasures to avoid, detect, counteract, or minimize security risks to physical property, information, computer systems, or other assets. They can be classified by several criteria. For example, according to the time that they act, relative to a security incident, before the event. Preventive controls are intended to prevent an incident from occurring, for example by locking out unauthorized intruders during the event. Detective controls are intended to identify and characterize an incident in progress, for example by sounding the intruder alarm and alerting the security guards or police after the event. Corrective controls are intended to limit the extent of any damage caused by the incident, for example by recovering the organization to normal working status as efficiently as possible. According to their nature, for example, physical controls, for example fences, doors, locks and fire extinguishers. Procedural controls, for example incident response processes, management oversight, security awareness and training. Technical controls, for example user authentication, login, and logical access controls, antivirus software, firewalls. Legal and regulatory or compliance controls, for example privacy laws, policies and clauses. A similar categorization distinguishes control involving people, technology and operations/processes. In the field of information security, such controls protect the confidentiality, integrity and/or availability of information. The so-called CIA triad systems of controls can be referred to as frameworks or standards. Frameworks can enable an organization to manage security controls across different types of assets with consistency. Controls overview. Controls are the means by which risk can be mitigated. Individual controls may reduce the probability of a particular cybersecurity occurrence or the impact of such an occurrence. Typically, to reduce both probability and impact of the occurrence, multiple controls will be applied. Types of controls. The word controls tends to conjure up images of electromechanical devices, but in the cybersecurity context controls can take on many forms. Some examples of example control types. Directive controls. Directive controls may be administrative instruments such as policies, standards and procedures. An example of a directive control would be the creation of an acceptable use policy for employee use of information resources. Preventive controls. A preventative control attempts to make the occurrence of a breach less likely by making it more difficult for the threat source to cause one. Examples are security guards, security fences, security training, firewalls and intrusion prevention systems. Detective controls. A detective control detects a security breach once it has occurred. Examples are intruder alarms, intrusion detection systems, system monitoring and log monitoring. Corrective controls. A corrective control reduces the effect of a security breach. An example is an antivirus system isolating an infected file. Recovery controls. A recovery control aims to restore business operations after a security breach. Encryption. Encryption types. Symmetric encryption is the use of the same key and algorithm by the creator and reader of a file or message. The creator uses the key and algorithm to encrypt, and the reader uses both to decrypt. Symmetric encryption relies on the secrecy of the key. If the key is captured by an attacker, either when it is exchanged between the communicating parties, or while one of the parties uses or stores the key, the attacker can use the key and the algorithm to decrypt messages or to masquerade as a message creator. Asymmetric encryption lessens the risk of key exposure by using two mathematically related keys, the private key and the public key. When one key is used to encrypt, only the other key can decrypt. Therefore, only one key, the private key, must be kept secret. The key that is exchanged, the public key, poses no risk if it becomes known. For instance, if individual A has a private key and publishes the public key, individual B can obtain the public key, encrypt a message to individual A, and send it. As long as an individual keeps his private key secure from disclosure, only individual A will be able to decrypt the message. 2. Typical areas or situations requiring deployment of cryptographic techniques. Given the risks involved, include transmission and storage of critical and/or sensitive data/information in an untrusted environment or where a higher degree of security is required, generation of customer PINs which are typically used for card transactions and online services, detection of any unauthorized alteration of data/information and verification of the authenticity of transactions or data/information. 3. Since security is primarily based on the encryption keys, effective key management is crucial. Effective key management systems are based on an agreed set of standards, procedures, and secure methods that address a. Generating keys for different cryptographic systems and different applications. B. Generating and obtaining public keys and distributing keys to intended users, including how keys should be activated when received. C. Storing keys, including how authorized users obtain access to keys, and changing or updating keys, including rules on when keys should be changed and how this will be done. D. Dealing with compromised keys, revoking keys and specifying how keys should be withdrawn or deactivated. D. Recovering keys that are lost or corrupted as part of business continuity management. F. Archiving, destroying keys. G. Logging the auditing of key management-related activities. H. Instituting defined activation and deactivation dates, limiting the usage period of keys. 4. Secure key management systems are characterized by the following precautions. A. Additional physical protection of equipment used to generate, store and archive cryptographic keys. B. Use of cryptographic techniques to maintain cryptographic key confidentiality. C. Segregation of duties, with no single individual having knowledge of the entire cryptographic key, i.e. two-person controls, or having access to all the components making up these keys. D. Ensuring key management is fully automated, for example, personnel do not have the opportunity to expose a key or influence the key creation. E. Ensuring no key ever appears unencrypted. F. Ensuring keys are randomly chosen from the entire key space, preferably by hardware. G. Ensuring key encrypting keys are separate from data keys. No data ever appears in clear text that was encrypted using a key encrypting key. A key encrypting key is used to encrypt other keys, securing them from disclosure. H. Make sure that keys with a long life are sparsely used. The more a key is used, the greater the opportunity for an attacker to discover the key. I. Ensuring keys are changed frequently. J. Ensuring keys that are transmitted are sent securely to well-authenticated parties. K. Ensuring key-generating equipment is physically and logically secure from construction through receipt, installation, operation, and removal from service. Normally, a minimum of 128-bit SSL encryption is expected. Constant advances in computer hardware, cryptanalysis and distributed brute force techniques may induce use of larger key lengths periodically. It is expected that banks will properly evaluate security requirements associated with their internet banking systems and other relevant systems and adopt an encryption solution that is commensurate with the degree of confidentiality and integrity required. Banks should only select encryption algorithms which are well established and are INL standards and which have been subjected to rigorous scrutiny by an international cryptographer community or approved by authoritative professional bodies, reputable security vendors or government agencies. This definition has been recommended as per para 9.1 of the report of the study group on large value bank fraud set up by the Reserve Bank of India in 1997. It follows that like other bank frauds, various IT-related frauds need to get captured through the fraud reporting system and banks should take adequate steps to mitigate such risks. Roles/responsibilities and organizational structure for fraud risk management. Indian banks follow the RBI guideline of reporting all frauds above 1 crore to their respective audit committee of the board. Apart from this, banks are also putting up a detailed annual review of frauds to their audit committee of the board. The Board for Financial Supervision, BFS, of RBI has observed that in terms of higher governance standards, the fraud risk management and fraud investigation must be owned by the bank's CEO, audit committee of the board and the special committee of the board. Special Committee of the Board for Monitoring Large Value Frauds. Banks are required to constitute a special committee for monitoring and follow-up of cases of frauds involving amounts of 1 crore and above exclusively, while the Audit Committee of the Board, ACB, may continue to monitor all the cases of frauds in general. Most retail cyber frauds and electronic banking frauds would be of values less than 1 crore and hence may not attract the necessary attention of the Special Committee of the Board. Since these frauds are large in number and have the potential to reach large proportions, it is imperative that the Special Committee of the Board be briefed separately on this to keep them aware of the proportions of the fraud, modus operandi and the steps taken by the bank to mitigate them. The Special Committee should specifically monitor and review the progress of the mitigating steps taken by the bank in case of electronic frauds and the efficacy of the same in containing fraud numbers and values at least on a quarterly basis. C. Separate department to manage frauds. The activities of fraud prevention, monitoring, investigation, reporting and awareness creation should be owned and carried out by an independent group in the bank. The group should be adequately staffed and headed by a senior official of the bank, not below the rank of general manager. D. Fraud Review Councils. Fraud Review Councils should be set up by the above fraud risk management group within various business groups in the bank. The council should comprise of head of the business, head of the fraud risk management department, the head of operations supporting that particular business function and the head of information technology supporting that business function. The councils should meet every quarter to review fraud trends and preventive steps taken by the business group, and report the same to the Special Committee. Components of fraud risk management. I. Fraud prevention practices. A strong internal control framework is the strongest deterrence for frauds. The Fraud Risk Management Department, along with the business/operations/support groups, continuously reviews various systems and controls to remove gaps if any, and to strengthen the internal control framework. The following are some of the fraud prevention practices that are recommended for banks. A. Fraud vulnerability assessments. Fraud vulnerability assessments should be undertaken across the bank by the Fraud Risk Management Group. Apart from the business and the operations groups, such assessment also cover channels of the bank such as branches, internet, ATM and phone banking, as well as international branches, if any. During the course of a vulnerability assessment, all the processes should be assessed based on their fraud risk. Controls need to be checked and improvements suggested for tightening the same. These should be reviewed in the fraud review councils. Mystery shopping is an important constituent of vulnerability assessment. Transactions are introduced in live scenarios to test the efficacy of controls. The results of the mystery shopping exercises should be shared with the relevant groups in the fraud review councils and be used for further strengthening of controls. B. Review of new products and processes. No new product or process should be introduced or modified in a bank without the approval of control groups like compliance, audit and fraud risk management groups. The product or process needs to be analyzed for fraud vulnerabilities and fraud loss limits to be mandated wherever vulnerabilities are noticed. C. Fraud loss limits. All residual/open risks in products and processes need to be covered by setting fraud losses limits. Fraud losses limits need to be monitored regularly by the Fraud Risk Management Group and a review needs to be undertaken with the respective business group when fraud loss amount reaches 90% of the limit set. In case it is difficult to set a fraud loss limit, a limit on the total number or total value of frauds may be defined. For the purpose of deciding how much a product or a process has used up the limit set, the cumulative value of frauds in that product or process during the financial year needs to be considered. D. Root cause analysis. All actual fraud cases above 10 lakhs and cases where a unique modus operandi is involved should be reviewed immediately after such a fraud is detected. The findings should be used to redesign products and processes and remove the gaps so that they do not recur. E. Data/information/system security. Most banks have incorporated several security measures for their documents, information, systems and customer deliverables such as checkbooks/debit cards. Security measures have also been incorporated during delivery of instruments such as cards/checkbooks/internet passwords to customers through couriers. Internet banking systems have security features such as separate transaction passwords, Two-factor authentication, multi-channel process for registering pays, upper limit on transaction value and SMS alerts to customers. It is also necessary that customer confidential information and other data/information available with banks is secured adequately to ensure that fraudsters do not access it to perpetrate fraudulent transactions. Appropriate steps need to be taken to ensure data/information/system security at the bank, as indicated earlier in the report. Information security and appropriate access control procedures ensure that only employees who are required to know particular information have access to the same and can put through transactions. Further, a bank's systems need to be adequately secured to ensure that no unauthorized person carries out any system modifications/changes. Appropriate verification procedures should also be incorporated at all channels such as phone banking, ATMs, branches and internet to ensure that only genuine transactions are put through. All the above security measures should be under continuous review for further strengthening. Details in this regard were covered in chapter on information security. F. Know your customer, KYC, and know your employee/vendor procedures. A strong KYC process is the backbone of any fraud prevention activity. Such a process enables banks to prevent unscrupulous elements from gaining entry into the bank's environment, which gives them an opportunity to carry out their fraudulent intentions. Similarly, appropriate due diligence procedures before recruitment of employees and vendors is essential to prevent known fraudsters or people with fraudulent motives to have access to a bank's channels. Banks have to implement strong procedures to carry out due diligence of potential customers, employees and vendors before they are enrolled. G. Physical security. All banks have a dedicated team to take care of the security of the physical infrastructure. This team should conduct regular security audits of various offices to check for deviations/lapses. It is the responsibility of this team to ensure that physical assets and data copied on magnetic/optical media do not go out of the offices of the bank without authorization. H. Creation of fraud awareness amongst staff and customers. Awareness on how to prevent and detect frauds is the basis of fraud management. Banks need to adopt various measures to create awareness amongst staff and customers. 2. Fraud detection. Detection of fraud. Despite strong prevention controls aimed at fraud deterrence, fraudsters do manage to perpetrate frauds. In such cases, the earlier the fraud is detected, the better the chance of recovery of the losses and bringing the culprits to book. System triggers that throw up exceptional transactions, opening up channels that take note of customer/employee alerts/disputes, seeding/mystery shopping exercises and encouraging employees/customers/well-wishers to report suspicious transactions/behaviors are some of the techniques that are used for detection of frauds. The exceptional/suspicious transactions/activities reported through these mechanisms should be investigated in detail. B. Transaction monitoring. Banks should set up a transaction monitoring unit within the fraud risk management group. The transaction monitoring team should be responsible for monitoring various types of transactions, especially monitoring of potential fraud areas, by means of which early alarms can be triggered. This unit needs to have the expertise to analyze transactions to detect fraud trends. This unit should work in conjunction with the data warehousing and analytics team within banks for data extraction, filtering, and sanitization for transaction analysis for determining fraud trends. Banks should put in place automated systems for detection of frauds based on advanced statistical algorithms and fraud detection techniques. C. Alert generation and redressal mechanisms. Appropriate mechanisms need to be established in banks to take note of the disputes/exceptions or suspicions highlighted by various stakeholders including transaction monitoring teams in banks and to investigate them thoroughly. Banks should have a well-publicized whistleblowing mechanism. D. Dedicated email ID and phone number for reporting suspected frauds. Banks can have dedicated email IDs and phone numbers for customers to report any fraudulent activity that they may notice. A dedicated team can be created to reply to customer queries and concerns through the above email IDs. Phone banking officers and branch staff should also be trained on response to customers' queries and concerns on frauds. Mystery shopping and reviews. Continuous supervision and control by managers/supervisors on activities is important to detect any abnormal activity. However, considering a bank's size and scope, this needs to be supplemented by mystery shopping to detect system flaws and also to identify unscrupulous employees/vendors. Immediate action needs to be taken on the findings of such reviews. Importance of early detection of frauds. A bank's fraud management function is effective if it is able to minimize frauds, and when fraud occurs, is able to detect the fraud so that the loss is minimized. 3. Fraud investigation. The examination of a suspected fraud or an exceptional transaction or a customer dispute/alert in a bank shall be undertaken by Fraud Risk Management Group specific committee/team of employees constituted to examine the suspected fraud. External agencies, if any, as appointed by the bank. Fraud investigation function. It is widely accepted that fraud investigation is a specialized function. Thus, the Fraud Risk Management Group should undergo continuous training to enhance its skills and competencies. The first step in an investigation process is gathering the entire transaction details, documents and complete details of the customer/employee or vendor. In order to investigate into suspected cases, the group would adopt various advanced techniques including computer forensics, forensic accounting and tools to analyze large volumes of data. The investigation team may conduct oral interviews of customers or employees to understand the background and details of the case. In case an interview of the person accused of fraud is required to be undertaken, the investigation group should follow a prescribed procedure and record statements appropriately. The investigation activities need to be carried out discreetly and within a specified timeline. The investigating team should take into account all the relationships of the involved parties with the bank while investigating and submitting an investigation report. The investigation report will help the respective business groups take a decision on all the relationships of the customer with the bank. The investigation report should conclude whether a suspected case is a fraud, and thereafter the report would form the basis for further actions such as regulatory reporting. In case of employee involvement in the fraud, the investigation report may be the basis of staff accountability and HR actions. It may be noted that, during the course of the investigations, banks should adopt only means permitted by law, regulations and code of conduct of the bank, and any inconvenience to customers or general public should be avoided. It is also important to note that certain investigations are best carried out by law enforcement authorities, and the bank should refer cases to such authorities at the appropriate time, to enable them to carry out their responsibilities efficiently. In case of need, the investigating team should seek the support of other specialized groups within the bank, such as the audit group, to carry out investigations efficiently. At times, investigation of a fraud wherein money has come into the country to an account in a bank through another bank in the same country needs to be done. The intermediary bank does not investigate or report the case, stating that it is merely an intermediary, while the recipient bank states that it has no knowledge of the transaction and is merely a recipient of the funds sent by the intermediary bank. In this case, it is clarified that the bank whose customer has received the money should investigate and report the case. B. Recovery of fraud losses. The concerned group in a bank, in which the fraud has occurred, should make all-out efforts to recover the amount lost. They may use specialized groups like legal or collections for this purpose. The investigation team may also be able to recover some amounts during the course of their investigation. The police may also recover some amount during their investigation. This would be deposited in court pending final adjudication. The bank should liaise with the police and keep track of such amounts. For reporting of frauds, as per the guidelines on reporting of frauds as indicated in the RBI circular, dated July 1, 2010, fraud reports should be submitted in all cases of fraud of 1 lakh and above perpetrated through misrepresentation, breach of trust, manipulation of books of account, fraudulent encashment of instruments like checks, drafts and bills of exchange, unauthorized handling of securities charged to the bank, misfeasance, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, conversion of property, cheating, shortages, irregularities, etc. Banks should also report frauds in the electronic channels and the variants of plastic cards used by a bank and its customers for concluding financial transactions. A. Frauds in merchant acquiring business. A special mention needs to be made here of frauds done by collusive merchants who use skimmed/stolen cards on the POS terminals given to them by banks and then abscond with the money before the chargeback is received on the transaction. It is imperative that the bank which has provided acquiring services to such merchant reports the case to RBI. B. Frauds in ATM acquiring business. Also, it has been observed that in a shared ATM network scenario, when the card of one bank is used to perpetrate a fraud through another bank's ATM, there is a lack of clarity on who should report such a fraud. It is the bank acquiring the transaction that should report the fraud. The acquiring bank should solicit the help of the issuing bank in recovery of the money. The facts of the case would decide as to which bank will bear the loss. C. Filing of police complaints. Banks should readily share data and documents requested by the police even in cases where the bank in question is not the victim of the fraud but has been a receiver of fraudulent monies into its accounts. V. Customer awareness on frauds. Creation of customer awareness on frauds. Customer awareness is one of the pillars of fraud prevention. It has been seen that alert customers have enabled prevention of several frauds and in case of frauds which could not be avoided, helped in bringing the culprit to book by raising timely alerts. Banks should thus aim at continuously educating its customers and solicit their participation in various preventive/detective measures. It is the duty of all the groups in banks to create fraud risk awareness amongst their respective customers. The Fraud Risk Management Group should share its understanding of frauds with each group, identify areas where customer awareness is lacking and if required, guide the groups on programs to be run for creation of awareness amongst customers. The groups should ensure that in each of their interaction with customers there is at least one message to make the customer aware of fraud risk. The following are some of the recommended measures to create awareness amongst customers. Publications in leading newspapers. Detailed do's and don'ts on the website of the bank. Messages along with statement of accounts, either physical or online. Messages printed on bank stationery such as envelopes, card covers, etc. SMS alerts. Message on phone banking when the customer calls as inserts or on the jackets of checkbooks. Posters in branches and ATM centers. Interstitials on television and radio. It should be ensured that the communication to the customer is simple and aimed at making them aware of fraud risks and seeking their involvement in taking proper precautions aimed at preventing frauds. Such communication should be reviewed periodically by the Fraud Risk Management Group to judge its effectiveness. Y. Employee awareness and training. A. Creation of employee awareness. Employee awareness is crucial to fraud prevention. Training on fraud prevention practices should be provided by the Fraud Risk Management Group at various forums. Banks may use the following methods to create employee awareness. Classroom training programs at the time of induction or during risk-related training sessions. Publication of newsletters on frauds covering various aspects of frauds and containing important message on fraud prevention from senior functionaries of the bank. E-learning module on fraud prevention. Online games based on fraud risks in specific products or processes. E-tests on prevention practices and controls. Detailed do's and don'ts put up on the worksite of the employee. Safety tips flashed at the time of logging into core banking system and number 40, CBS and number 41, screensavers, etc. Emails sent by the respective business heads. Posters on various safety measures at the workplace. Messages/discussions during daily work huddles rewarding employees on fraud prevention. A positive way of creating employee awareness is to reward employees who have gone beyond their call of duty and prevented frauds. Awards may be given to employees who have done exemplary work in preventing frauds. Details of employees receiving such awards may be published in the fraud newsletters.